Well, spring has officially begun to show its face here in the northern central interior of British Columbia, where I'm coming to you from a folding chair in my backyard. The beautiful browns of late March are clearly all around me, but in the next coming weeks, we're going to start to see the greens and the other colorful colors that come with spring. Life is going to begin to pop up in places all around us. The birds will return, flowers begin to sprout, new life will be everywhere we look. But among the beautiful native life that we see in the springtime, we're also likely going to see a lot of invasive life around us. Many of these invasive species, they appear beautiful and they may look like they belong, but truly they're here in competition with the native life that has evolved to be in this area. I could sit here in my comfortable folding chair and try to give you a crude description of what makes a plant or any organism invasive. But I think I'm going to leave that up to the professionals. And today, those professionals come to us from the Northwest Invasive Plant Council. They operate here where I'm located out of the Amanika region in British Columbia, but there are plenty of invasive plant councils throughout the country, and I'm willing to bet you have a local one around you that you might not even know about. So without delaying any further, let's get right into that conversation. My name is Mike Bryden, and you're listening to Wilder Insights. Stay tuned.
Left alone, all alone, deep beneath the sea. And the coral reefs pretty soon. Do you really need going high, really far in a quiet place? Turn your face, understand why you're fake.
Okay, hi, I'm Michelle Miller. I'm the Executive Director for the Northwest Invasive Plant Council. I have been doing this for just a year now, so still a little bit fresh, but it's going pretty good. So,
hey everybody, I'm Katie Cunningham. I am a board member on the Northwest Invasive Plant Council, and I have been a board member for a year and a half. I went to the last AGM, and when they asked for a call for board members, I put up my hand, and everybody looked around confused as to why there was a new board member. But I've been really loving it for the last year and a half.
That's awesome. So can you guys explain to me what the Northwest Invasive Plant Council is?
Absolutely. So, the Northwest Invasive Plant Council is a nonprofit organization that helps manage and treat invasive plants across the northwest of BC, so about 1/3 of the province we cover. It goes from like the Robson Valley through Prince George and the Lakes District and Bulklina Chaco all the way up to the Yukon border, so Skeena and Stikine as well. Our mission, I will read this, is to prevent further damage to the ecosystem of Northwest BC from invasive plants and to work to rehabilitate areas that have been degraded by them. So this includes our on-the-ground work, the coordination and management of invasive plants on public lands and private lands. And this also includes education to the public and just preventing the introduction of invasive species to BC.
Right on. So can you explain to me what an invasive plant is? And I know that might be different from non-native, right?
Yeah, exactly. So an invasive plant is basically a plant that has been introduced to a new region. So a lot of our invasive plants in North America come from Europe. So a plant that is native to Europe that's been introduced to North America or the northwest of BC. Invasive plants always have a harmful component to them. So that's social or economic or ecological. So not all introduced species are considered invasive. So they really need to have that harmful component to them to be considered invasive. So sometimes these are plants that are brought over that outcompete. Often they outcompete native plants for resources like water or nutrients, and take over an area and decrease biodiversity. Sometimes they have like a human health component to them. So some invasive plants, like giant hogweed, for example, secretes a sap that is phototoxic. So if you get it on your skin, you can get burns. And then some invasive plants take over agricultural fields, or we think about, the pine beetle and the damage that's done in BC. So invasive plants always have a harm component to them. So it's important to understand that not all plants that are introduced to a region are invasive. So think about daffodils. So they are an introduced species. They do grow in North America, but there's no harm component to them, and so they're not considered invasive.
Okay. So you said they're brought over here. How do they get here?
Yeah, so introduction of plants occurs naturally. As we know, plants can move across an ecosystem. So there are natural processes for introduction of plants, but more often than not, we're talking about plants that have been introduced via anthropogenic means. And so a lot of the time this happens through, say, cargo ships. You think about how many cargo ships there are on the planet right now, moving from location to location. People can transport them. Say you take some firewood and you travel thousands of kilometers somewhere else, and then you go to use that firewood. That firewood can contain insects and pathogens that are harmful to forest ecosystems in the introduced range. So often this introduction happens because of us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that firewood example, I feel like I see those signs at every campground you go camping in, right? Like, don't bring firewood from
Exactly.
the outside. Is that scale? Like, say I brought firewood from northern BC to a campsite in southern BC. Is even that, like, smaller scale as harmful?
Yeah, it's hard to say. It depends on the region that it's been brought from, and it depends on the pathogens that could potentially be transported. But you think about BC and all the biogeoclimatic zones in BC. There's a number of invasive species in southern BC that we have not seen in the northwest BC region yet. But it's important that we practice good prevention. And so I would say really any distance you're bringing firewood, I would consider just, buy local firewood and burn local.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're recording this in Prince George right now. Is this where you guys are based out of generally?
Yes.
Yes, for the most part. Can you think of an example of an invasive plant species in Prince George that's giving a negative effect?
Yeah, so one of the ones that are a little bit newer to our region that we really want to highlight is the mountain bluet. It to go off of what Katie was saying earlier about getting introduced, this was a really common horticultural plant that, especially in Burns Lake, kind of was in everybody's yard. And for years, it wasn't spreading outside of its kind of yard and garden containment area. But in the more recent years, probably 10, 15 years, it's been shown to slowly start spreading past these areas. So mountain bluet is kind of getting further and further outside of the garden areas and into the natural ecosystems surrounding us, like forests. And you'll see it all around Prince George in ditches and moving into, forested areas. Rainbow Park has quite a bit of mountain bluet that we've been trying to remove manually every year, but it's persistent. So that one I would say is a higher priority for us in Prince George area. Another one would be the common tansy, which it is very prevalent in near the railways. So in the industrial site and near Cottonwood Parks, we did a community invasive plant poll in Cottonwood Park this year to try and keep that spread from these really high areas of population into the parks and the areas that everybody loves to enjoy and walk through and see the natural biodiversity that we love in BC. So that's those are our two highlights. I think today the common tansy is really tough because it is toxic to livestock and wildlife at high volumes. So really trying to keep that from spreading into agricultural areas is a priority.
Is this mountain bluet also toxic to wildlife?
I don't believe it's as toxic, but the thing about invasive plants is it's because it's not as natural in our wildlife's cycle of what they would normally eat. It's not something that they're going to just go and generally eat when they could choose their natural food cycles. So it's outcompeting what they would normally eat, and that's the challenge with invasive plants is they have the ability to kind of take over and create a monoculture. So it's reducing that biodiversity of what should be there. If there is one thing that can eat it, that might still work out okay, but overall you're going to get less different types of species that are going to be able to live off of these plants.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And would you say that's probably the biggest thing with invasive plants is they outcompete native plants?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So invasive species, not just plants, and this pertains mostly to animals, but there is a component that relates to plants. Invasive species are the second leading cause of biodiversity loss on the planet. And so number one would be land encroachment, land use, reduction in habitat. And so invasive plants, because they outcompete native species, and not only do they outcompete, so when a plant or an animal is introduced, in their native range, they may have a native predator or pathogen. But when they're introduced to a new area, that predator doesn't necessarily exist. And so there's nothing to keep it in check. So that's the real problem, is that if a plant is introduced from Europe, maybe there's a insect or weevil that in Europe controls its population, but in North America doesn't exist. And so the ecosystem needs time to adapt to that. And when we are moving plants and animals and species around at the rate that we do as humans, they just cannot keep up those adaptations. And so really that biodiversity loss is the most significant effect of invasive plants.
So biodiversity loss, honestly, that topic in itself is the whole reason why I started this show.
Mm-hmm.
Is like the conservation of biodiversity is so incredibly important to me and important to the planet. I was wondering if you could briefly explain why biodiversity loss is such a tragic event happening right now. Big question.
It's
sorry.
a big, yeah, no, that's okay. It's a big question. I guess I'm going to bring it to adaptive resilience. When we think about forest succession or ecosystem succession, we think about our planet's ecological capacity to withstand change. And our planet's going through a lot of change right now with global climate change. Our planet's ability to adapt to this and become resilient to it really depends on that biodiversity. And when that biodiversity is reduced, the planet has a reduced capacity to take on that disturbance. And that it doesn't just relate to climate change. It relates to land disturbance, natural resource extraction, any of those disturbances. When we have less resilience to be able to adapt to that, the effect is going to be bigger. And so I think that adaptive resilience is the most important part of biodiversity. So we want species richness in our ecosystems. And when these invasive plants come in, like Michelle was saying, they create a monoculture, they reduce that biodiversity, and now something comes in. I'll give an example. So there's a couple of invasive plants in BC. We don't see them that much in Northwest BC, although a little bit. I'm thinking of two in particular. One's called cheat grass. It's or sometimes it's called downy brome. It's just a grass that creates a monoculture. And when it creates this monoculture and wildfire comes through or grass fires come through, those fires burn hotter and more intensely. The same for on Vancouver Island. There's lots of Scotch broom, which is it's a shrub, basically. And it has a high oil content, so it burns quite hot and actually acts as a ladder fuel. So as the wildfire goes through, the flames actually are higher than they normally would be without Scotch broom. And so these two invasive species, eucalyptus in California with the fires a few years ago, they create more intense wildfires. And then it creates a cycle where we have more intense wildfires, and now there's a disturbance, and invasive plants love disturbance. And so invasive plants are often the first to establish, and they're creating this fire regime that is unnatural to our ecosystem. So that has reduced our adaptive resilience for things like wildfire, which are a natural forest practice, right? So we've always had wildfires. Why are they more intense? Yes, global climate change, but also because of this adaptive resilience. So it comes back to these feedback loops in our ecosystems.
That was great. That was a perfect explanation. So like our local forests have evolved alongside wildfires, and they've come up with ways to tolerate them,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the introduction of these species gives them that disadvantage.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah, for sure.
You guys do a lot of programs where you go out and you remove invasive species, correct?
Yeah.
Can you think of an example where either locally or anywhere on the planet where the removal of invasive species has benefited the ecosystem or improved it in such a way?
Yeah, I can take that. Plants are challenging because plants are very hard to control. And when you have sort of limited funding and limited budget to control invasive plants, often eradication, so like complete removal, it is our overall goal. But reasonably, we're looking to control invasive plants and control their spread. And so there's not that many examples where an invasive plant has been removed from a region. But there's lots of examples of invasive species. So a good one that has kind of been in the news a bit, in 2019, an invasive hornet, so it's called a giant northern hornet, was found on Vancouver Island. These hornets are, I don't know, inches long. Like
That's terrifying.
They're probably 3 to 4 times the size of any hornet that is native to North America, to give you an example of the size. So these are native to China and Japan, in Asia. And in Asia, honeybees, or the bees, they have an adaptation that can kill these hornets. They surround the hornets, these honeybees, and move really fast. And they basically sort of cook these hornets. And so they have an adaptation to allow them to kill these things, basically. But the honeybees in North America do not know how to do that and don't know what these things are. And so these giant northern hornets are really harmful, actually, to honeybees if they were introduced to North America. So in 2019, a nest was found on Vancouver Island. And there was a big coordinated effort between the province of British Columbia and beekeepers to find this nest and remove it. I wish I could show you a picture. They look like basically they're wearing spacesuits because these hornets are so big and the sting is so bad that they need specialized suits. So they removed the nest, and then a big monitoring program was conducted. And that was a joint effort between BC and Washington because there was a couple nests sort of found right near the border. And in the last 2 years, there's been no nests found. They think likely that came over on a cargo ship, maybe from China or Japan. It's hard to understand or overstate how devastating that would have been for bee populations in this province and in this region. And so coordinated efforts like that, funding, early detection, rapid response are so important when it comes to invasive species in general. There's a couple of other examples of like zebra and quagga mussels. They're a small mussel, like maybe like 4 or 5 centimeters. They're quite small. They get into waterways and they just proliferate. So I've seen pictures of motors on or propellers on boats that are covered in these zebra and quagga mussels. Right now they're in the United States, and there's a huge coordinated effort to try and stop the spread of these zebra and quagga mussels into Canada, because we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars of damage to water systems and waterways if they are introduced into BC.
They're in the Great Lakes already, aren't they?
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. You might have seen, I've seen a few times, the province actually does boat inspections. And so you might have seen them like on the highway. I've seen them near Mount Robson. And they are specifically looking for that. So they are looking for zebra and quagga mussels, because when you bring watercraft from one water body to another, if you don't decontaminate your boat, you could inadvertently carry some of these.
Clean.
Yeah, the clean, drain, dry campaign.
Right. I've seen those on signs around all over the place.
Exactly.
So that's clean, drain, dry. So empty the ballast of your boat before you take it anywhere as well. And are you worried about mussels in the ballast, or is that something else within the water there?
There's a couple of different aquatic invasives. Zebra and quagga mussels get a lot of press because there's just the economic damage from those could be potentially quite large. There's also invasive aquatic plants. Water milfoil is an example of that. It, again, just takes over waterways and really slows down the movement of water and can make them better water courses, better habitat for mosquitoes, which decreases the recreational value of these water sources. So, they can take a lake that's great for swimming and turn it into a mosquito pond, basically.
Yeah. I grew up around the Great Lakes, and I remember hearing about zebra mussels, and from an ecological perspective, I feel like it's not the biggest fear for the common, like for the public and the everyday person. I wish it were, but even just like swimming, it was the risk of like cutting your feet up while you were swimming.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. We need photos on this podcast so we can kind of see like the level of damage that these things can incur. They get into water pipes as well, and they'll take over like just a layer. Imagine tiny little mussels, but hundreds of thousands of them, and they'll just cover water pipes and cause damage to water systems as well.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So you teased earlier some of the plant removals you guys are doing with the Northwest Invasive Plant Council. Can you talk about some of the other projects you guys are working on?
Yeah, so I kind of just wanted to touch on what Katie was saying about the introduction of these species and how your question around what's happened like for eradication. But I think our priority really is around management and then also prevention. So prevention really leads into our education program and then also working with communities as well. So we do have the community invasive plant polls. So this is an opportunity for the public to work with us we help identify a site that we might not be able to actually treat chemically, or it's a sensitive area that we really want to hand pull and engage the community to help support this removal of invasive plants. So we have a lot of programs around getting the community involved, as well as we just try to get out and provide education around invasive plants. So again, touching on that clean, drain, dry. And then there's also programs like Play Clean Go, which is focused in recreational areas that people might be going on trails that they can. We have a new boot brush here up at UMBC, actually. We partnered with a research student who was interested in people's interactions with boot brush stations and the messaging. And so these kinds of things are to prevent the spread of seeds that might be caught on shoes or bike tires or things like that, invasive plants that you might not be aware of even, that are catching a ride on your clothing, equipment, vehicles, anything like that. People traveling from one region to another. Most of the maps of invasive plants, if you look at them, all follow pathways of human travel. So
Makes sense.
yeah.
Yep. How can people get involved locally here around Prince George? Like, how can they find you guys?
So we actually just have a new website that has come out. It's a great resource for looking up invasive plants and then also getting in touch with us and seeing what's going on. We have a newsletter that we try to release a couple times a year to update people on events that are going on in the region. We are always looking for volunteers to help us get out, and we have a huge region, so we really rely on key community members that are interested in either education or removal of invasive plants, and we love to partner with people. We also have a lot of we try to reach out to classrooms and other youth groups to see if we can do field trips, educational days, and things like that. So.
Right. Education is such an important aspect of this, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For sure.
So what was the URL for that website, if you don't mind?
NWIPC.org.
Perfect. So for people who aren't local, who might be listening to this, what advice would you give them for dealing with invasive plants or just invasive species in general?
I would say the big thing is do some research about invasive plants and animals in your area. And I'm sure there's lots of good resources if you're in Canada. There's a number of invasive species councils in the other provinces as well. In BC, we are the Northwest Invasive Plant Council. But there's also an Invasive Species Council of BC. And they have some great information on their website as well. So do some research on what invasive species are in your area, and then how you can prevent the spread of those invasive species. There's some good information, I'm sure, on some of these Invasive Species Council websites that give you some good information on how to prevent the spread as well. A lot of that has to do with when you're a recreational user, as Michelle said. If you're going on one trail and your boots are really muddy, and then you go on a different trail, say days, weeks, months later, clean off your boots and make sure there's no plant material on there or mud. We talked about clean, drain, dry, and also not taking firewood thousands of kilometers and burning it somewhere else. There's a few other things I wanted to highlight about pets. So this is actually a big source of invasive species introduction is pet owners who release their pets into the wild. So goldfish is a good example. There's a lake in Terrace that has been inundated with goldfish, and that likely came from somebody dumping their goldfish into the lake. There's other species, exotic species especially, that are introduced by pet owners letting their pets loose. It may seem like it's an ethical thing to do. I would strongly encourage anybody who's thinking about doing that not to do that. It can have really harmful effects on the environment. And so really the big thing is just educating yourself on what you can do, and then spreading the word. Talking to your friends and family and making this a priority, because if nobody talks about it, it's not a priority. So understanding the effects and why it's a big deal, and then letting other people know why it's a big deal.
Katie and Michelle are both speaking to you from the Northwest Invasive Plant Council, located here in the northwestern sections of BC. If you want to educate yourself on this topic and then spread the word, I've linked their website down in the show notes below. Down there, you'll also find a link to the Canadian government's website on invasive plants. Here, you can learn to identify each species and what you should do if you come across them in the wild. I want to formally thank Michelle and Katie for coming on the show. We recorded this interview back in the fall of 2025, hence the continuity error in my hair length, if you happen to notice. But I truly appreciate you guys coming in and spreading the word on invasive species. If you liked today's episode, consider giving the show a follow on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Amazon, or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And while you're there, I'd really appreciate it if you gave the show a rating. It really helps the show out, and it helps other like-minded listeners find us. Wilder Insights is partially produced at the CFIR radio station, located in Prince George, BC. And if you're in this neck of the woods, you can check out the show every Thursday at 10 a.m. on CFIR Radio 88.7 FM. Our theme music is from the band Funeral Culture. I suggest checking those guys out. Wilder Insights is hosted, produced, and edited by myself, Mike Bryden. You can find our email and our socials down in the show notes below. If you have any questions or want to suggest a guest for a future episode, you can send me an email or shoot me a DM on Instagram. That's the best place to get a hold of me, and I can't wait to hear from you. That's it for this episode, everyone, but remember to stay curious, get outside, and I'll see you in the next episode.